The late Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu was also the chairperson of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He retired as Archbishop of Cape Town to devote all his energies to the work of the TRC. In recent years, he's faced criticism from some on this chapter of his life, while others say he was the best man for the job. Let's look at his time that he spent as a TRC chairperson with former TRC Commissioner Yasmin Sooka. Good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time. To you, he was like a second father. I wonder what reflections you have tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to your listeners. I was part of a privileged group of people who had probably had the best mentor in the world, somebody who had incredible moral clarity, but also a vision of what South Africa could be like. And he infused that into the work of the Truth Commission. He really did believe that there was a human being lurking in every one of us. And he sought to find that in the people that came before the commission. And in that way, really tried to make a difference to South Africa. He lived the spirit of Ubuntu, and he tried to practice that in the commission too. So, you know, from the perspective of where I am, and I've worked under a number of different leaders, he was probably one which really shaped the identity, not just for me, but for many others who worked with him. So it was a real privilege.
And when you look at the visuals of the TRC at the time, you see him break down sometimes during difficult testimony. At some, in some points, you see him really being firm, just really taking a serious stance. But one of the things that really stands out was how throughout the years, even not only at the TRC, he was putting on such a powerful display of what an empathetic leader should be like.
And he lived that. You know, what many people don't remember was that during the years of apartheid, the Archbishop didn't only confront the apartheid state, but, you know, there were many times in heated moments across our countries when people actually turned on other people. And, you know, there was this famous incident where the crowd tried to necklace a young man, turning on him and calling him an impimpi. And the Arch personally took responsibility and ensured that nobody touched him. And that was really the hallmark of the way in which he led the commission. He really was humbled by the fact that people were willing to come forward and to give testimony to the commission, but it also pained him deeply. And after each hearing, he would ask the question, how could they have been so cruel to our people? And, you know, the one thing he always said was that while we knew, or we thought we knew, what was happening during the apartheid years, what really struck him as we traveled through the country was how similar the stories of torture and killings and massacres were. And that for him was the conclusion that, in fact, this was well planned, it was orchestrated and systematic. But at the same time, he would always argue, and, you know, many of us were very young and headstrong, really. We would argue that they needed to be punished. And the Archbishop would be there trying to find the humanity in the perpetrators too. And he would argue that, in fact, we needed to find that human being in them. And we would say, well, actually, without accountability, you can never find that humanity. And while he believed in forgiveness, he really did, but he also believed that it came with a price. And that price was that you had to come and disclose the truth before the commission. When he took a tough stance with people was when he felt that they were lying or they were being untruthful. And at that point, he was not, scared about calling them out, which he often did, particularly with the politicians.
And when you then look at what then became the work of the commission in recent years and how some are really viewing it in the public domain, it was even something that continues to be in the public discourse, that he may have been too lenient. Some say that he may have appeared too lenient on those who should have really been punished extensively, saying that the perpetrators of apartheid got off very lightly. And others are saying no, but in fact, he was trying to navigate the country through a difficult time. I wonder then, what do you say to those tonight who say that he let the perpetrators of apartheid get away with a slap on the wrist?
Well, you must remember that it's not him. In fact, the law that established the commission provided that if people came forward and they made full disclosure, then of course they would get amnesty. And that was really the price that was paid for this peaceful transition at the time. But the compromise also required that where people had not applied or where they had been refused amnesty because they did not disclose the truth, then the law should follow its course. And, you know, when I heard our president speaking, he was quite moving when he talked about the fact that a great tree has fallen. And he spoke about the branches. But, you know, the one branch that he can do to honor the work of the Archbishop and the work of the Truth Commission is to ensure that the victims and their families who have waited 23 years for justice, that their cases are investigated, and where possible, there are prosecutions. The second is to ensure that the victims and their families receive reparations, including community reparations, and that access to the archives of the Truth Commission and archives of all the state agencies at the time, those should be made accessible to our people. That is the greatest honor we can give the Archbishop. And this pained him deeply that, in fact, the work of the Commission, many people thought that it had no value, but it was not because of the Commission. It was because the democratic state failed to live up to implementing the recommendations. And I think we need to assign that responsibility to our state. It's not too late. They can still find ways of honoring him and honoring the work that went on.
And last night I was speaking to someone who was your colleague at the TRC at the time, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza. And one of the things is that he was touching on exactly what you're talking about, saying if those that did not get amnesty are not tried and facing the music, it's a betrayal to, Tutu's legacy. And one of the things that stands out, and when you're reading the report, if I may borrow from what he said, Tutu said, having looked the beast of the past in the eye, having asked and received forgiveness and having made amends, let us shut the door on the past, not in order to forget it, but in order to allow it to not imprison us. Let us move into the glorious future of a new kind of society where people count not because of biological irrelevancies or other extraneous attributes, but because they are persons of infinite worth created in the image of God. These words, if you were to listen to what you're saying now and what Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza said, will never really fully materialize what he was looking for, as long as the victims' families do not get the justice they're seeking.
Absolutely. And in fact, there are two parts to that. You know, the Archbishop was also deeply conscious of the fact that apartheid was not only about what we call civil and political rights violations, and that is torture and killings and massacres and enforced disappearances. It was also about the social, economic dimension of apartheid, the policies which led to the exclusion of Black people as citizens of our country, the question of land dispossession. And that is why one of the recommendations the Commission also made was to, in fact, enact a 1% wealth tax, which would go into the President's Fund for reparations for our people. And it really pained him that none of those recommendations were taken up. And in fact, when you look at the sort of wealth and inequality in our country and the fact that poverty is racialized, this pained him. You know, in 2006, when it became quite clear that the state was faltering on setting up the prosecution's process, the Archbishop was willing to sign the founding affidavit when we went to court to demand that, in fact, we get guidelines on prosecutions. And throughout that period, whenever we asked for his support to ensure that the prosecutions and investigations would take place, he was absolutely unwavering in his support for that goal, because he believed, in those words that you just read, that we could never be free unless we dealt with the aspirations of victims and their families too.
All right, Ms. Sooka, thank you so much for your time and those reflections tonight, and condolences to you, because we know that, to you, he was like a father, a mentor, and someone who was very close to you. Thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
That was former TRC Commissioner Yasmin Sooka.